Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. On the evening Nicole had spent secretly dreading and secretly longing for, Beyond the Gates finally delivered the unexpected tenderness fans had been speculating about for months, as Dr. Jonathan Rollins, whose reputation in Silvercrest Falls wavered somewhere between brilliant, mysterious, and dangerously aloof, arrived at her townhouse with a surprise that would shake the emotional scaffolding Nicole had been building ever since her messy breakup with Ryan, her exhausting custody battle for Maylee, and her unresolved resentment toward her sister Krista, who had accidentally leaked Nicole's old rehab records to the town gossip blog. Yet nothing about the night proceeded in the way viewers assumed it would, because when Nicole opened the door expecting flowers, or maybe an awkward but sweet attempt at charm from a man known for being terrible at dates, she instead found Dr. Rollins standing beneath the flickering porch light, holding a sealed envelope stamped with the logo of the Silvercrest Medical Board, and for one terrifying half-second Nicole's mind spiraled into panic, thinking he'd somehow dredged up her past disciplinary file or discovered the malpractice suit her ex-husband tried to pin on her years ago. But when she asked what this was and why he had brought it on their first date of all things, Rollins smiled in a way that looked uncharacteristically vulnerable and said he hoped she'd trust him enough to open it later, not now, because the night deserved warmth rather than fear, and because he had spent weeks planning something for her, something that required a leap of faith she might not be ready for, but that he hoped she'd take anyway. Then, instead of heading to the upscale tapas bar everyone assumed a man like him would choose, he led her to his old beat-up Jeep, the one no one in town had seen him drive since his first year at the hospital, explaining that he'd held onto it because it reminded him of who he was before the medical world consumed him, before he lost his fiancée to a tragic post-op infection, before he stopped believing that life could offer anything unexpected except pain. Nicole, touched but cautious, climbed into the passenger seat, surprised to see a carefully folded blanket, a battered thermos, and a small metal box tucked near the gear shift, and when she asked where they were going, Rollins simply said, "Somewhere you told me you always wanted to go," leaving Nicole bewildered because she could not remember ever confessing such a thing to him. But as they drove past the familiar storefronts of Silvercrest Falls and toward the winding hills beyond town, she suddenly recalled a late-night conversation months earlier in the hospital cafeteria when she'd been exhausted, when her hair had been a mess and her scrubs coffee-stained, when she had rambled about childhood memories with her grandmother and mentioned longing to see the meteor showers that once passed over Clearpoint Ridge. They arrived at the hilltop overlook just as the sky darkened into deep indigo, and Rollins opened the trunk to reveal a portable telescope, a star chart covered in scribbles, and a box containing her favorite chocolates, exactly the brand she had once said she loved but rarely bought because they were too expensive. Nicole's breath caught, not because of the chocolate, but because no one in her life had listened this carefully in years, and she felt the unease in her chest waver between happiness and terror, for tenderness had always been dangerous for her. A reminder of promises that could vanish without warning. As they settled on the blanket, sipping the steaming hot cocoa Rollins had made from a family recipe, he told her he knew tonight might feel overwhelming, that vulnerability always came at a cost, but that he wanted her to have something she lost long ago, the feeling of being genuinely seen. And when the first streak of light slashed across the sky, Nicole's tears slipped free, not because of sadness, but because of a memory of her grandmother whispering that stars were promises kept by the universe, and she confessed quietly that she had felt unworthy of gentleness for a long time, too long, and Rollins responded that he had once felt the same, especially after watching people he loved slip away. And then, with trembling fingers, Nicole finally opened the envelope he had brought, and what lay inside was not judgment, not medical board files, not damning evidence, but a letter from the Silvercrest Community Outreach Fund approving a full scholarship for Maylee's summer science program, an application Rollins had secretly completed on Nicole's behalf after seeing how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed, how deeply she loved her child despite every unfair accusation thrown her way. Nicole froze, overwhelmed, whispering that he didn't have to do any of this, and Rollins replied that he wanted to. That this wasn't a grand gesture meant to impress her, but a simple act of wanting her to feel supported for once, because she had carried burdens alone for far too long. And just as the tension softened, and Nicole leaned closer, intending to thank him in a way that words could not, headlights suddenly flashed behind them, and a dark SUV pulled up aggressively, dust swirling as a familiar figure stepped out. Ryan, her ex-husband, arriving with that smug, poisonous expression that always preceded conflict, claiming that Nicole was violating their temporary custody agreement by being unreachable, though Nicole had left Maylee with Krista hours earlier and had followed every rule. Rollins stood protectively between them, calm but icy, asking Ryan to leave, yet Ryan smirked and said he had proof Nicole was unfit and that the courts would finally see it. But before Rollins could speak, Nicole snapped, unleashing years of buried fury, and telling Ryan that he no longer had power over her, that she would fight him with every legal resource, every ounce of strength, and every witness who had ever seen him manipulate their daughter. The confrontation intensified under the raining starlight until Ryan, sensing he had lost control, stormed back to his SUV and sped away, leaving Nicole shaken but undeniably stronger. Rollins helped steady her. And though the moment had shattered the peace of the date, it had also revealed something deeper between them, a shared resilience, a shared bravery, and a shared recognition that love, when it finally arrived after so much broken history, could be messy and frightening and imperfect, but still worth reaching for. The night ended with Nicole resting her head on Rollins' shoulder as the meteor shower peaked, both of them quietly acknowledging that this date, with its sweetness and chaos and confrontation, was not just a beginning but a turning point for both their lives on Beyond the Gates, where nothing is ever simple, but where sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivers exactly the surprise you needed. But the night did not truly end on that quiet hilltop, because as Nicole rested against Dr. Rollins' shoulder beneath the dying shimmer of the meteor shower, the emotional storm Ryan had reignited continued stirring inside her. And though she tried to steady her breathing and focus on the warmth beside her, she knew deep down that Ryan's sudden, hostile appearance wasn't random. It was calculated, desperate, and almost certainly linked to whatever he had hinted about having proof, a word that echoed in her mind with the same hollow dread she once felt during the custody mediation sessions where Ryan excelled at twisting half-truths into weapons. Rollins sensed her spiraling worry, his hand tightening gently around hers, and he whispered that they would face whatever came next together. But Nicole, still grappling with the idea that someone might choose to stay rather than run, squeezed back with uncertainty, admitting she wasn't accustomed to leaning on anyone. And Rollins, looking at her through the faint moonlight, said he admired her independence, but that even the strongest people deserved support, especially when their world was under siege. He stood and began packing the telescope into its case, and Nicole helped, though her hands trembled slightly as the wind picked up, rustling through the grass, with a sound that reminded her of hospital curtains, the ones she used to hide behind when she didn't want anyone to see her cry after overnight shifts. They walked back toward the Jeep, but before Rollins could start the engine, Nicole's phone buzzed again, 3 missed calls from Krista and a text that chilled her. "Nicole, call me now." Something happened. Her pulse hammered as she dialed, and Krista's frantic voice spilled through the speaker, explaining that Maylee had woken from a nightmare, inconsolable, screaming that she saw Daddy yelling at Mommy in the dark, though no one had told the child where Nicole was or that Ryan had even been involved earlier. Nicole's blood ran cold, because Maylee had always been sensitive, empathic, with an uncanny instinct for emotional shifts around her, but this nightmare was too specific, too eerily timed, and Krista added that Ryan had shown up at her house shortly after leaving Clearpoint Ridge, pounding on the door, demanding to speak to Maylee, shouting accusations until neighbors emerged and threatened to call the police. Nicole nearly collapsed under the weight of panic, fear, and rage, but Rollins placed his hand over hers, grounding her once again, and told her they would go straight to Krista's house. The drive down the darkened road was tense and silent except for Nicole's trembling breaths, and Rollins, eyes fixed ahead, finally spoke. saying he had long suspected Ryan was unraveling beneath his polished lawyer persona, that his behavior in court had always reeked of suppressed volatility, and that tonight confirmed they were dealing with someone who might escalate further. When they arrived, Krista rushed outside, hair disheveled, face pale, clinging to Maylee, who buried her tear-streaked cheek into Nicole's neck the moment she stepped out of the Jeep. Nicole soothed her daughter as best she could, whispering that everything was okay, but even as she spoke she knew things were not okay, not even close. It was then Krista revealed the part she had hesitated to text. Ryan had left behind an envelope on the porch after storming off, with Nicole's name scribbled in rushed, angry handwriting. Rollins urged her not to open it outside, and once everyone was inside Krista's living room with the doors locked, Nicole hesitated for a moment before sliding her finger under the seal, discovering inside several printed screenshots from what looked like a manipulated financial report falsely suggesting Nicole had been siphoning money from the nonprofit clinic she occasionally volunteered at, a fabricated narrative Ryan could easily spin in court to portray her as irresponsible or unethical. Nicole's head spun as she realized Ryan's plan wasn't about concern for Maylee. It was about control, punishment, and revenge for the autonomy she had reclaimed, and Rollins, scanning the documents, said with unwavering certainty that they were forgeries and that he knew exactly the accounting specialist who could verify it. The tension in the room sharpened further when Maylee lifted her head and whispered, "Mommy, Daddy was scary tonight," her voice tiny and raw, and Nicole hugged her even tighter, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. As the clock struck midnight, Rollins, now fully entwined in the crisis, suggested they not stay at Krista's house, fearing Ryan might return, and instead come with him to his place, where the security system was recently upgraded and multiple cameras made unwelcome visitors easy to track. Nicole hesitated, aware of the intimacy and impropriety of moving from first date to emergency refuge, but Krista urged her to go, saying she would stay with friends for the night and would call the police if Ryan showed up again. So Nicole, exhausted and emotionally bruised, allowed Rollins to guide her and Maylee to the Jeep once more, and as they drove deeper into the night, Maylee finally fell asleep in the back seat while Nicole stared out the window, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of romantic tenderness and sudden danger that had transformed a meteor shower into the beginning of a battle she couldn't escape. Rollins reached for her hand again, not in a forced or dramatic gesture, but in the quiet, steady way of someone who meant to stay, and though Nicole didn't say it aloud, she felt something shift inside her, something terrifying and hopeful all at once. As the headlights carved through the darkness toward whatever awaited them on beyond the gates, where every moment of tenderness is matched by an equal measure of chaos, and where even a first date could ignite a storyline that would change the lives of everyone connected to it. When Dr. Rollins pulled into the driveway of his lakeside home, usually a place of calm solitude where he retreated after long shifts, Nicole felt a swirl of relief and unease wash over her, because even though the security cameras blinked like watchful guardians and the motion lights illuminated the porch in a protective halo, part of her still feared Ryan lingering somewhere in the shadows, watching, plotting, waiting for another opportunity to twist her life into chaos. Rollins carried the sleeping Maylee inside with surprising gentleness, and Nicole followed close behind, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter's head resting safely against his shoulder. A fragile moment she never expected to feel with someone new, especially not on the night that was supposed to be their first date. Inside, the house felt warm, filled with soft lamplight and the faint smell of cedar, and Rollins quickly locked the doors, checked each camera feed, and assured Nicole that nothing unusual had been detected, though he admitted he had already texted a colleague at the police department to stay alert in case Ryan tried to make a report or file something that could blindside her. Nicole laid Maylee on the guest room bed, brushing a loose curl from her daughter's forehead, her stomach tightening with the awareness that everything in her life now felt like a balancing act between fragile peace and immediate disaster. When she stepped back into the living room, she found Rollins staring at the forged documents Ryan had left, his jaw tense, his eyes filled with that mixture of anger and protective determination she had seen earlier when Ryan confronted them on the ridge. He confessed he had known men like Ryan, Men who hid behind prestige and charm while manipulating everyone around them, especially the women who tried to leave. And he told Nicole that she wasn't overreacting, that Ryan was escalating, and that they needed to get ahead of whatever move he planned next. Nicole's hands trembled as she admitted she had spent years trying to convince herself that Ryan wasn't dangerous, that he was just bitter, petty, jealous, controlling, but not capable of real harm. Yet tonight felt like a line had been crossed, as if something in him had snapped. Rollins suggested calling her lawyer first thing in the morning, but Nicole shook her head, saying she didn't know if she could wait until morning, because if Ryan had already contacted his own legal team, he could file temporary motions overnight, with enough manipulation to jeopardize her custody. Rollins took her shoulders gently, grounding her once again, and told her to breathe, to remember that she had allies now. Not just him but Krista, the neighbors who witnessed Ryan's outburst, the clinic staff who knew she'd never taken a dime, and the countless people who had seen her rebuild her life inch by inch. Nicole closed her eyes, letting herself feel the steadiness of his presence, though the vulnerability scared her far more than she wanted to admit, because depending on someone meant risking heartbreak, disappointment, or betrayal, things she had become far too familiar with. But before she could overthink it, a sudden knock at the door jolted them both, loud and heavy enough that Rollins instinctively positioned himself between Nicole and the entryway, holding up a hand for her to stay back. He checked the camera feed, expecting the worst, but instead of Ryan's SUV, he saw Officer Brexton, the same police officer who had once responded to Ryan's drunken argument at a neighborhood barbecue, standing on the porch with a folder in his hands and a grim expression. Rollins opened the door cautiously and Brexton stepped inside, explaining that Ryan had filed an emergency complaint accusing Nicole of placing their child in a dangerous situation with an unrelated man and claiming he had reason to suspect neglect. An accusation so absurd and malicious that Nicole felt her knees weaken. Brexton, who had never trusted Ryan's slick charm, assured her that he didn't buy the story for a second, but law required him to check on Maylee's welfare since the complaint was time-stamped less than an hour ago. Nicole led him quietly to the guest room where Maylee slept peacefully, and Brexton, relieved, documented the scene, noting in his report that the child was safe, cared for, supervised, and in no danger whatsoever. When he stepped back into the living room, he warned Nicole that Ryan's late-night complaint suggested he was either unraveling or trying to strategically build a legal paper trail to undermine her, and Nicole's stomach twisted with dread because she knew exactly how Ryan operated. He weaponized systems, rules, and procedures. He exploited loopholes. He created chaos that forced her to defend herself instead of living her life. Brexton promised to file a supplemental statement noting Ryan's earlier aggressive behavior toward Krista, and after he left, Nicole felt her chest tighten with the realization that tonight wasn't just a crisis. It was the beginning of a war Ryan fully intended to win. Rollins sat beside her, gently wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and she let her head fall against him, exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified of what tomorrow might bring. Yet, even as her fears swirled, she felt something steadier beneath them. The undeniable truth that no matter how frightening things had become, she wasn't facing any of it alone. Anymore, not after the way Rollins had stood beside her on the ridge, not after he had helped Maylee, not after he had opened his home and made it safe, and as she drifted toward an uneasy sleep on the couch, Rollins keeping watch beside her, the final thought lingering in her mind was that their first date, once meant only to be sweet, simple, and healing, had become the beginning of a battle for her future. One that would ripple through the lives of everyone in Beyond the Gates, where love and danger always walk hand in hand.